Good evening, everybody. My name is Scott LaFlamme. I'm the Economic Development Director and Staff Liaison to the Committee for Energy Efficiency and Sustainability here with the Town of Yarmouth. Welcome to what we hope is the first in a series of community conversations about Yarmouth's climate future. And we're lucky to have some great speakers and some excellent data to share with folks in town. For the past few months, the town's been working collaboratively with the Greater Portland Council of Governments, GPCOG, and with neighboring communities to identify climate-related vulnerabilities in Yarmouth, brainstorm opportunities to mitigate climate change impacts, and to prepare for a newly established technical assistance, support, and grant program through the state of Maine, which is a community resiliency partnership. We have Sarah and Kelly here, both from GPCOG, who's going to help walk through that program, and we'll have opportunity at the end for some overview and some action items to follow up with that. And with that, I will pass it along to Sarah and Kelly to present their findings.
Right, thank you. Kelly, I think is going to go first.
Yes. Good evening. So as Scott said, we're going to run through kind of an overview of what the Community Resilience Partnership is and the process to enroll and apply for grants. We'll do a high-level overview of climate hazards and impacts, then talk about the specific enrollment materials and how that relates to Yarmouth specifically. The committee will give a kind of overview on a lot of the priority action areas they're considering for grant application, and then we'll open it up to questions, discussion, and looking at and kind of ranking, if you so call it, the action areas. So the Community Resilience Partnership is a state-funded program from the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future, or GOPIF. It is aimed to help municipalities prepare for and adapt to climate action through community action grants. So you can be service providers, which is what GPCOG is, can be awarded a grant to work with communities. So for this cycle, we are working with 5 communities. Beyond Yarmouth, we're also working with North Yarmouth, Freeport, Cumberland, and Brunswick as part of this first initial cohort. And then the goal is that each municipality can apply for a community action grant themselves. So kind of an overview structure. You have GOPIF. You then have regional coordinators, which GPCOG is also a part of our regional coordinator collaborative. So anytime you have questions, just come ask us. We're here to help you. And then we are a service provider. And then we help the municipalities like Yarmouth enroll and apply. And you can apply individually as a single municipality, in which case you can get up to $50,000 per grant cycle, or you can apply as a cohort. So you can, if you and another town kind of have similar priorities, you can submit a grant together and get up to $100,000. This is a map of the first grant cycle. So I should say this partnership started January. I think it launched January of this year, and the first kind of grant cycle was in the spring. And so now we are helping to prepare Yarmouth to apply during the second cycle, which is in September. And then it will repeat every year, so every spring, every fall. And once you enroll, you can apply for a grant every single cycle. So we'll get you enrolled. You can apply for a grant in September. Then you can apply for a grant again in next spring, apply for a different grant next fall. So you're continuously enrolled for up to 2 years, and then you have to kind of re-enroll in the program and submit updates as to actions you've taken, things you've done. And we can walk through that a little more in just a bit. So to give an overview of things that have kind of already happened in the region, during the spring cycle, Wyndham was awarded a grant for the town energy plan, which GPCOG is going to help them complete. So not only are we here to help you enroll, we can also help you pass the grant phase as well. Bridgeton is doing an open space plan. Portland is updating some climate resiliency zoning, and South Portland is doing a street design. And then also to highlight that several towns in the area have completed or are in the process of completing climate action plans. And so we're really focused on this regional approach, knowing that sustainability and climate action is not limited to a town border, and we can take a lot of regional approaches to helping solve this. So through this whole process, we hope that Yarmouth can enroll in the partnership and have access to funding. We're helping to try and engage the community in a lot of these sustainability actions and prioritizing climate resilience, reducing your greenhouse gas emissions, improving clean energy actions, and then having you apply for community action grants in September. And I will also say that this is, as long as any of your actions, which all of your priority actions do, align with Maine Won't Wait, you don't need a match. So it can be, in a sense, a free $50,000 to your community, which I think everyone would appreciate. And I will then pass it to Sarah for climate hazards and impacts, or you can also add on to anything else.
Well, does anybody have any questions about the program before we dive into kind of broader view? Yeah, Danielle.
Just to clarify, so in any given grant cycle, you can either participate in a community grant or a municipality, like individual grant?
Yeah, you can only apply once per cycle, so you wouldn't be able to do both, but in different cycles you could do either.
You said up to $50,000, so that means you can't, say, apply for 2 grants for $25,000.
No,
No,
exactly.
no.
Yeah, one grant only per cycle, up to $50,000.
Unless you're combined with another town, and then it's up to $100,000.
But yeah, you couldn't do like one for 20 and one for 30.
Yep.
Okay, so I will go pretty quickly through. There we go. Put it in the middle. Some climate hazard and impact, broad overview stuff, and then Kelly can talk a little bit about some more specific to Yarmouth. So when we talk about climate impacts at GBCOG, we're really talking about a combination of factors. Climate hazards, so a climate hazard would be increased temperatures, rising sea levels, increased intensity of weather, increased precipitation, and then existing social vulnerabilities, income, people of color, access to resources. Those existing social vulnerabilities really combine with the climate hazards to make climate impacts. So it's not really, we're not just talking about the particular hazard that happens. There's really obviously a lot of existing conditions that can exacerbate climate impacts on individuals and infrastructure. So some of the climate hazards and impacts that we're experiencing now and will in the future experience in Maine, rising sea levels, which are causing coastal erosion, flooding, and really changing ecosystems already. So here's some pictures in Portland. There's already at king tides some significant damage to infrastructure and flooding that are happening in all of our communities, but this just happens to be a picture of Portland we took this winter. Ocean warming and acidification, which is, again, changing ecosystems, harming and really changing the fishing industry in Maine. Increased precipitation and storm intensity, which also leads to flooding, and not just coastal flooding, but significant inland flooding as well from inland waterways. Overburdened wastewater systems and declining water quality in our freshwater resources. So in the increases in warming, more variable temperatures are obviously increasing energy that we need, that we consume for cooling, increasing vector-borne diseases from the increase in shifting nature of pests like ticks and other things, and then changing terrestrial ecosystems, so really changing the forest systems and other ecosystems that we see in the state. So just to dive a little bit deeper, the state has warmed more than 3 degrees since 1895, and in terms of projections for the future, the one that really sticks out to me is this kind of idea of high heat days. So right now we may experience 4 or 5 a year, something like that. Looking at 2100, we're looking at experiencing 36 or higher high heat days per year. So it's really a significant difference when you think about the what we're used to here in Maine. In terms of changing precipitation, this is a little more of a kind of what I'd call a mixed bag. The average yearly precipitation in Maine has increased by 15%. They're anticipating an additional 5% increase. There are very likely increases in intensity and variability of precipitation, so that we'll see periods of significant rainfall mixed with periods of significant drought. That's why it's a little bit harder. Precipitation is a little bit harder to kind of model out. They do expect, and we have already seen, changes in the type of precipitation that we can expect. So especially in the winter, seeing less snow, more icing events, and more rain when it used to be snow because of warming temperatures. So sea level rise, sea levels, to date have risen about 7.5 inches. This is a graph of the predicted possible scenarios of sea level rise. The good news, if anybody needs some good news today, is that more recent reports are showing that the 8-foot and above scenarios are very unlikely, and they are taking them off of sea level rise projections. So we're really looking in the more of the medium to higher scenario, not the highest scenario. So the state has asked all municipalities to plan for 1.5 feet of sea level rise by 2050, with the possibility of 3.6 feet. So, those pictures of Portland that we saw flooding already, that's with 7 inches just of sea level rise. So when you think about 1.5 feet, that's a significant amount more water. And they really will see the potential for just nuisance, that kind of what we call nuisance flooding. So sunny day flooding, not even during storms, would be 15 to 20 times more likely by 2100. So in terms of warming, I'm sure everybody has heard, if you haven't already, but the Gulf of Maine is the fastest warming body of water in the world. And the water temperatures have increased 2.5 degrees in the past few decades. So there's significant warming happening and will continue. So what does this mean, for us here in Maine and for everybody, really? We will see increased health risks. So the rate of heat illness, especially in a state like Maine that has a significantly older population and less access to cooling, we'll see significant increases in health risks. Shifting ecosystems, like we talked about already. We've already seen this in the southern lobster industry has moved significantly northward, and then we'll continue to really see, there are both challenges and opportunities within that, and I think really understanding what does it mean for our particular economy is really important. Strain on critical infrastructure, seeing many road washouts and other types of damage on infrastructure. And changing natural resource economy, like we said, Maine is obviously significantly dependent on both tourism and winter sports and the fishing industry. So understanding how these changes are really going to impact the ways in which the economy functions here. The decline in water quality, which is really obviously a key concern for our freshwater resources, and then flooding and erosion that we're already seeing on our beaches and our coastline. So to get specific for Yarmouth, we have put together some maps, which we have on the posters out there, and we have an example here that Kelly can sort of speak to where this comes from and what it's actually saying.
So we partnered with First Street Foundation, and they have done some flood modeling called Flood Factor, and it looks at much more inland flooding. So Maine has a good kind of sea level rise and coastal flooding, but there hasn't been as good data looking at the inland flooding, and that's where we find really a lot of the impacts are going to occur. So we've partnered with First Street Foundation and Flood Factor to access these data and kind of overlay it with Yarmouth and figure out, okay, what roads might actually be impacted. And so looking at that, all of the pink areas on the screen, and there's more on the poster, are areas that will be flooded in 2050 or during flooding events. And so in a sense, neighborhoods might get cut off. It might be hard for emergency vehicles to access. And so it's helpful to sometimes map some of these things to understand where your most vulnerable resources might occur. So if 295 is going to flood, it might mean in the future looking at rising it above flood levels, or Route 1 or other critical access roads. Or if you find that a neighborhood is going to be completely cut off in a flood event, then you're going to have to figure out some ways to either access them during a natural disaster or to fix the infrastructure ahead of time.
So this mapping really, I think what's always surprising for me is the impact on inland flooding and the amount of, obviously the Royal River is a significant resource here in town, but also, the creeks and streams that feed into that and come off of it can also experience significant flooding in a 100-year flood event. So this is by no means exactly accurate. It's a model, and just like all models, it has can be have errors or also not be exact, but it's meant to sort of give a broad look at where areas of the town might be most vulnerable.
Sarah, 60 roads within Yarmouth proper?
Portions of, yeah.
Portions of.
Yeah, so not
like
right,
small-
not the
yep.
full road, but it
Yep.
could be, right? Any.
Yep.
And so, I mean, this really also illustrates the regional challenge, right? Because 295 does not belong to the town of Yarmouth. It's obviously a critically important regional transportation mode. So it's, this really is, does not need to be all Yarmouth's problem, but it really illustrates sort of the potential challenges that could come from this.
And I will say, when it says 60 roads, the way the analysis works is you can have all of the roads in Yarmouth. So even in a subdivision, or say that has, a lot of roundabouts that might have 20 roads within, if even a portion of it, it would count towards one of these roads. So it might be very small roads. So just the way the analysis is worked. So. Then we also have ecosystems. So I know Yarmouth has, a lot of aquaculture and focused on that. And at the sea level rise, you're going to start seeing impacts to a lot of the intertidal habitat. Whether that's tidal marsh migration through sea level rise, your eelgrass beds are going to be impacted, and also by water quality. As Sarah mentioned, you have ocean acidification. Some of these species are not going to be able to survive the warming ocean temperatures. And so that can impact a lot of your aquaculture, your shellfish, your kelp, clammers, in addition to kind of the infrastructure along the coast. So any of your docks, whether it's commercial, private, public, some of them might get washed out. And so making sure that you still have public access to those resources is important.
And so this also shows the bright green is where marshes would need to migrate in order to sort of maintain the integrity of that marsh, which we want to do because they do protect us from flooding. But in some cases, you can see that they might be butting up against development that already exists. So if there is nowhere for the marsh to migrate, then you would lose that marshland. And, sea levels would come right up to that development as well. So you lose that, that protective barrier. Yeah. Go ahead.
Median forecast is based on a 3.9 foot.
This is based on 3.9 feet, so the at 2100.
2100.
Yeah. Although there is the potential for 3.6 feet to happen by 2050. I didn't go into the details of sort of the various sea level rise scenarios, but I'm happy to talk about them if anybody wants to know why. They're the broad range. There's some significant sort of technical reasons, but it also depends on the rate of melting of certain glaciers and that kind of thing.
And that's the P50.
The P50. Yeah.
Is that right?
What's that? The
50% probability.
the probability, right? Exactly.
So a number of different levels, they probably based upon probabilistic.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the lowest one is 90% probable.
Yeah.
That's the P50.
Yeah, this is the 50. So the 1.5 feet is the one that they're, is most likely to happen, and which is why the state is asking municipalities to plan for that. Yeah.
The current highest annual tide blue line, I think when I looked at these materials and sent them, it's like at this scale, right under the red lines. It's really hard to tell where the current high tide is.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
But it is sort of, it's in there. It
Mhm.
would probably be good to see it.
Yeah, so this is from, we have a new data source if you'd like to access it. It's public. It's called the Intertidal Data Portal, and you can, it's, open and free for anybody to use, and you can really zoom in on specific areas so you can see exactly where the high tide line now is and where it might move. The challenge with a lot of this is that these are still pretty crude data models because they don't include wave action, they don't include details on the land and land subsiding or not. The state is working on a dynamic, what do they call it? Hydrodynamic model of the entire coast of Maine. So we will get to a place where we understand better and have better data on what impacts might look like in more specific areas. That will likely not get down to the level of resolution, like 2 meters or, it will be a little bit higher up, but it'll still be much better than the kind of bathtub model we have right now, which is just like, if the water this rises, Yeah, the topography is and Maine has such differing topography across our coastline, right? Areas of Scarborough are very different than areas here in Yarmouth. So this is, are the best data we have right now.
I'm saying it is true that for Yarmouth and especially this area, that they are kind of overlapping. And so at this scale, which makes it hard to have a static map, at a scale to kind of see and understand. So I would recommend to try and go to the Intertidal data portal because all of this data is taken from there. And so you can zoom in and look at, a specific property as well.
And if folks are interested in accessing that, we can make that available through the website.
And then lastly, or I guess not lastly, but we'll talk kind of the human impact, so social vulnerabilities. The health of a community and the resilience of a community often come down to the people. You can look at infrastructure, you can look at ecosystems, but you also really have to take the human component into it. And people are going to respond to climate change differently, even within the same town. And that kind of comes down to your social vulnerability. So things like age, pre-existing conditions, how much communication do you have with your neighbors or your town? So we've pulled some statistics all from the census data, the 2020 American Community Survey, which we do know has flaws in itself. So we're not saying it's perfect, but it's the best data source that we have for right now. And so looking at specifically, almost 30% of residents who are 65 years and older live alone in Yarmouth. And so that means that they might have trouble evacuating in a natural disaster. They might have more health impacts. And so being able to get them emergency responses or even being able to communicate ahead of time things that might happen or how to get them to a cooling center. We also have looked at older housing, which we considered for right now to be before 1980 due to fire codes. That's not to say all older housing is more vulnerable because some are very well kept, but oftentimes they might not be as resilient as newer builds. And then one of the most salient indicators of social vulnerability is poverty and those who are cost burdened. So if you're spending 30% or more of your income on house-related expenses, whether that's rental or mortgage, then you are less likely to have those resources to respond to climate change, whether that's improving your house to be more resilient, whether that's repairing it in case something happens. And so taking a look and understanding how the health of your community and how that might differ across the town is kind of important to understand and build that resilience. And so we have a couple maps on posters in the room that show the variability within the town because not everyone in the town is the same and certain areas are going to be more vulnerable, and then you can learn how to put forth your resources in the future.
So we did a quick sort of high level look at emissions in the town. Obviously, a greenhouse gas inventory takes some time. This is pulled from our transportation models that we use. So looking at transportation emissions in the county, Yarmouth is 2.5% of the total county, which is slightly lower than your population share. So you're doing pretty good there. I was in Freeport last week, and I think theirs is 4.8% or something, and their population share is similar to yours. So this is taken from actual like travel data that's used. And then the looking at sort of per household, you also have a pretty low emissions per household, 11th lowest out of 28 municipalities in the county. So just kind of some interesting high level emissions information. And this is the state inventory on the left, sort of just looking at what the share, with most towns really, except for Portland, I think is the only town that would be significantly different, that, transportation will likely be your biggest source of emissions, and then residential and commercial buildings. So to talk a little bit about the service provider activities, we talked about the municipal resolution, the self-evaluation, and obviously the community workshop where we are here tonight. So for the municipal resolution, Kelly, do you want to talk a little bit about?
I'll pass it off to Scott, but I'll just say those are the 3 components you need in order to enroll in the program. So pass your resolution, fill out the self-assessment and this list of actions, and hold your community workshop. And that will get you enrolled for 2 years. In order to then kind of re-enroll, you have to submit again a updated self-evaluation and an updated list of actions to show that you are making progress. And so I think, Scott, I will pass it to you to talk about the resolution.
Of course, yeah. So as I mentioned, as we got started, I'm the staff liaison to a committee, a council-appointed committee that focuses on climate resiliency, energy efficiency, and sustainability. And so we have many members of that today, and a few will get into a little bit better detail of the types of activities that SEAS has been up to over the last 4 or 5 years, which is pretty significant. And heard some really fascinating data points, and I think Yarmouth is really putting its best foot forward to do its part into curbing some of those pretty scary trends. So one thing I'll mention to begin with is the resolution. It's going to be handled here in just a second. Our self-evaluation the committee did as a group, and that self-evaluation just takes a look at sort of existing plans in place, previous activities to sort of self-scout on how we're doing as a community to be prepared and to try to avoid some of those vulnerabilities. And
yeah, this is just a few things we pulled from the self-evaluation.
Great. So you can take a look. Of course, the coastal and inland flooding, as Sarah and Kelly laid out, is going to be particularly interesting for us to keep an eye on over the next several years. Because we are an island community, there's obvious areas of concerns when it comes to storm surges and other natural impacts. And because of that, the infrastructure that services those communities within Yarmouth are going to be something we need to keep an eye on and invest in, I should say. So with that, I'm going to pass it along to Danielle Hood and to Peter Fromuth, who chair and vice chair the SEAS committee, and they can come up and share some examples of some projects that we've done today.
Good question.
If you go to the, there we go. Perfect.
So Peter, you'll step in a second. Do I stand here?
That's you.
Hi, I'm Danielle Hood. It's nice to meet you in person, all of you, because I feel like I've seen many of you over camera. So it's really nice to be here in person. As Scott mentioned, I am a relatively new chair to the committee and have been really thrilled to work with the committee on some exciting stuff over the sort of short time that I've been on the committee. And one of the key things we've done has been to work on the resolution that Scott has mentioned. To put sort of a little bit of SEAS and who we are into context for folks. SEAS is a committee that was formed in some capacity in 2018. I think it went through a name change or something at some point, but in spirit, it was formed in 2018 and was really formed as an advisory board, not a policy-making board, but an advisory board to support town council in its pursuit of creating and promoting policies with an eye to energy efficiency and sustainability, specifically within the town. And one of the things that was signaled by the town council's adoption or creation of the Seas Committee is that there was a real strong commitment, even in 2018, to making decisions on behalf of the town with an eye toward sustainability and our future climate challenges. So I think that was a very strong move on the part of the council, and they have continued to signal strong support for those causes through their recent actions. Next slide. Ahead of recent actions, which we'll get to in a second, the council or the committee has been involved in many, many projects. And given that they almost all predate my tenure, Peter is going to talk through some of those. And then I'll step back up and talk about the resolution.
Thanks, Danielle. As Danielle mentioned, I think the committee's gone through at least one name change, and if you try to say Committee on Energy Efficiency and Sustainability 2 or 3 times, you might agree that it needs another name change.
Hopefully,
But,
hopefully Randy Bates is
that's
listening
right,
to
right.
his favorite acronym.
Above my pay grade. So anyway, let me tell you a few of our brags. These are all fairly recent. Let me start with a marquee, which is the municipal and school department solar power purchase stuff. And if there is really anybody who doesn't know what a PPA is, it's basically just a long-term agreement to purchase electricity. In this case, solar power. And in this case, we managed to get 92% of all of the usage of the schools and of the municipal buildings. And I think it's for 20 years in it, Scott, and we're saving millions, and we're saving, buckets of, rather I should say tons of GHGs over this period of time. So we're proud of it. Currently it's 2 sites, one at Naples and one at Acton. And it's, is it 4 megawatts, 3 and change?
Just under 2.
Just under, okay. All right. Forgive me for, I'm just a little too ardent. The next one, the electric vehicles, we managed to score a few essentially promotional electric vehicles, which are effectively free. I mean, they're long-term leases, which the town is currently using. So we've got 3 Hyundai Konas for Yarmouth. We also managed to, also for free, get some charging stations. 2 are set up behind the town council and 1 at the Department of Public Safety. They're in constant use and they're free. I don't know how much longer that'll be the case, but get on over there if you've got EV. Let's see. Then we've certainly done a fair amount before my time of public outreach. It's sort of movie nights on climate-related things. I think something or other on heat pumps. I imagine we'll be doing a lot more of that in the, I can't say post-COVID. I'm still wearing a mask because of a household challenge with COVID. But in the less intense COVID period, we'll be starting it up again. Let me see. Okay, let me talk about Wyman. Well, first of all, the Royal River. I really want to say that the Royal River, which is our beautiful river bisecting the town, is a gem of a river where there's been a great deal of effort on the part of the Royal River Alliance to protect the health of the river itself and of the fish population. And I'm going to yield because I don't know a great deal about what we've done on that except to support them. Wyman, on the other hand, if there's anybody who doesn't know, on Cousins Island is what is probably, I'm guessing it's the biggest power plant in Maine. I'm going on a limb here, but I'm fairly certain we have the biggest power plant in Maine. It is oil powered. It's a peaker plant. It is rapidly approaching the end of its effective economic life. So we're sitting here with this beautiful piece of land, which has been occupied by a power plant since 1957, knowing that in the relatively near future, it's likely to be looking at decommissioning. We as a community have, of course, a strong interest in preserving the useful life and the highest and best use, in particular, of the Madeline Point area of Cousins. And so together with two other town committees, the Economic Development Advisory Board and the Harbor and Waterfront Committee, we are undertaking a sort of full spectrum look at possible successor uses for Wyman and at the options available to the town and to the state to act as helpful influences on the decisions to be made by this private owner, which is Next Era Energy. It's a subsidiary for Florida Power and Light. I think the critical thing here is that the rule of thumb is decommissioning takes about 24 months. It can be longer, it can be shorter, depending upon the engagement of the stakeholders, of which the local community is an important one. So we want to get out ahead of that and create a public process in which we put our oar in and hopefully influence the decision in a way that's redounds to the benefit of the community. Next, let's see. Oh. No, not
Next on the list.
slide yet. Maybe that's a hint. Maybe I should sit down. I mean, how much time have I got left, Kelly?
As much as you want.
All right. So next, Efficiency Maine electric vehicle rebate policy. That's a mouthful. Basically, what that refers to is that the committee very keen on getting a better handle on the 54% of our GHGs, which are transportation cars, almost all of that private vehicle, getting a better handle on that, therefore spurring the adoption of electric vehicles in private ownership, therefore taking a closer look at the rebate structure that Maine currently employs. Efficiency Maine Trust is the agency that leads that effort, and that brought to our attention some oddities in the structure, one of which was that the rebates are primarily for new cars, and they're not nearly enough to make a new EV affordable for anybody earning around the median income. So most drivers. So we thought, shucks, if you're trying to encourage adoption of EVs, why not direct the rebates to the people who buy the cars and do the driving? So the Yarmouth CEAS proposed that a reform which will result in rebates for used vehicles, high-functioning used EVs, and we presented to the Governor's Council's Working Group on Transportation, and to our great surprise, the head of Efficiency Maine Trust decided to try out the Yarmouth proposal on a statewide basis, on a trial basis. We'll see. I'm not holding my breath, but that was the promise, was to consider doing that in the near future. Let me move on. LED conversion. There are about 600 and change formerly CMP-owned street lights. We have replaced these with LED lights. I don't know, I think they were maybe, high-pressure sodium? I don't know what they were. But they were hot. And, that means generating, when you generate a lot of heat, you use a lot of energy. They were also much more expensive than LEDs. And so at a savings of, there we go, efficiency in our title, at an efficiency improvement of 40 to 60%, we replaced all of these with LEDs and are also saving significant money by so doing. I might just say that the LEDs are sort of dark sky compliant, and the sort of brightness and hue characteristics are consistent with best practices. So we're pleased at the town's interest in going forward with that. We've done a fair amount early on regional climate action programming with some of our neighbor communities, in particular Falmouth, Cumberland, also more recently with Brunswick. Others, Danielle probably or Scott can tell you more about this. It's an exciting area just because we're capturing economies of scale and capturing greater leverage by doing it. There's an awful lot that you can do more effectively when you work together regionally. Electric school buses, one of my favorites. Over a year ago, we started interacting with the school district to advocate for and then to assist with the contracting for the purchase of one and then two electric school buses. We have now done that. There are two that they were expected in August. Supply chain, you ever heard of that issue? Supply chain problems have held it up, and probably we won't get them till late fall. But anyway, it's terrific. So we helped with the RFP, setting out what we thought were important requirements. We helped advocate to the school committee and various other ways. Talked about the impact on kids of diesel, trapped in a cabin with a lot of diesel exhaust, especially in the wintertime. Anyway, they bought it. And the issue is, where do we go from here? We got 13 buses. 2 of them have now are in the process of being replaced. The other 11 is a bigger fish to fry. The issue will be how are we going to get the funding? This is going to involve a fairly significant community role. We were successful in getting quite a bit of funding. It turns out 75% of the cost of the 2 electric buses were paid by state and federal, but it's unlikely to be replicated. So a community-wide issue there for us to tackle. And lastly, I did want to mention, one of my favorites, a community solar farm on Sligo Road. So the idea here is to convert a 14-acre brownfield site out Sligo Road, still close to the core of Yarmouth, to convert that site to a solar farm capable of providing the electricity needs of about 200 homes and close enough to be seen by Yarmouth residents, Yarmouth kids. You get the satisfaction of knowing that your house is being powered by the sun. It also we're trying to work a deal whereby even the first 200 subscribers to this particular solar farm must be offered, I should say, to Yarmouth residents for the first 90 days, up to a number of 200 Yarmouth residents, which is, I think, very nice. I hope I've gotten those numbers right. In any event, there's lots more, but we're a busy committee. And the last thing I want to say is that, and even though Danielle is probably going to cover a lot more of this, is that the Climate Emergency Declaration is something that was brought to the committee by a group of high school students, members of the Green Voices Society at Yarmouth High School. And these are sort of, these are mean green troublemakers. I mean, they have got a vision of where they want to take their community and their state and their country and their world, and it's really inspiring. So they sold it, and we bought it, and then we helped them, particularly Danielle, helped them write it in a form that was acceptable as a council resolution. But now it's created these benchmarks and goals, and it's really a tribute to our kids, and it's a measure of the degree of community involvement that we now can boast of here in Yarmouth. Anyway, that's way longer than my allotted time, but I'll give you back to Danielle.
I'm done. That's okay. Yeah, the youth did an amazing job, and they are an impressive group of kids. for sure. Intimidating group of kids, I'm not going to lie. Some very confident young people. So yes, as Peter mentioned, we did work with those folks on getting the resolution passed. So just the context, and everyone in this room knows, 2020, Maine Won't Wait was implemented with some very specific and ambitious targets for the state of Maine, with a 80% reduction in greenhouse gases for the entire state by 2050 and 45% by 2030. With actually, I think there's a net zero sort of goal by 2045. At the town level, the Green Voices Society took a version of the resolution that has ultimately been passed to Town Council back in October of 2021, and Town Council was hugely supportive of it. They just wanted it to go to committee to get tightened up a bit. And so that's where SEAS as an advisory committee really stepped in and helped facilitate and sort of lead the revision of that document, along with representatives from Green Voices and Town Council, in order to be able to pass it back to Town Council in a form that they felt was something that they could pass. And that got done in February this year, so it was really a collaborative effort. The meeting at which that got passed was inspiring. There were lots of middle school kids and high school kids who came out and all had statements, and it was tear-jerking and awesome, really, really encouraging. And what this resolution does, I think, Kelly, you had a slide a while ago that had 3 things that a resolution has to do in order to qualify as the sort of price of admission into the partnership. And it had to set some specific reduction targets. It had to name specific individuals or groups who were responsible for executing that or stewarding that. And I forget what the first one was. It was something else, but ours does it. Whatever it was. I can't remember what it was, but I was like, yes, yes, yes. All 3 of those. We actually got very lucky in passing this, that it went to committee for the months that it did, because in that time, the partnership came out in January. And so we were able to retrofit our resolution in edits in order to satisfy those requirements, such that we didn't have to go back and pass another one in order to qualify for the partnership, which was great news and fortunate, like a happy accident, as Bob Ross would say. So what the resolution does is, in addition to meeting those 3 criteria, it also kind of acts as a basis for Yarmouth to stand on in their commitment to take action. And for Town Council, it's sort of their price of admission to proceed on enacting policies and engaging in conversations around vulnerabilities and things like this. In terms of the goals, they are aggressive, I think is probably a good word, with net zero as a goal for the municipal emissions by 2030, and on a path toward 80% for a community-wide situation. And as Peter mentioned, there have been a lot of things done in town with respect to municipal buildings and systems that are already working toward those targets, and it's a matter of sort of getting an updated view of where the town is and continuing the good work that has been done. But I think in terms of municipal buildings and things, which are one of the largest components of the municipal footprint, we're probably doing okay, and I think we can meet that. And so the aggressiveness of these targets is in part based on the fact that Yarmouth has done a lot so far, and that we are a smaller, more coherent community than the state at large, right? It's a little bit of a smaller nut to crack, though still a tough one. And then 2050, we're looking for a net zero community-wide target, which is, again, slightly more aggressive than the state's 80%, but it's a different beast than the whole state. The other thing that the resolution does, besides set those targets and things, is it does, as is required, specify a group to be responsible for stewarding and shepherding these efforts. And the resolution does not specify any tactics specifically, except for the formation of a task force specifically focused on climate action planning. And that task force will be town council appointed, as are all of the other committees. It is initially and will continue to have some membership represented from C's committee members. And also, we have solicited volunteer applications to the community at large and have received pretty good input from that. Folks have not heard much back from that process, but it's in part because elections happened and the appointments committee has kind of flipped over. We are told that you will hear soon. So that process is happening. Admittedly, that is one of the things that we're a bit behind schedule on already, but we're hoping we can make up some time. That task force will be charged with describing sort of the scale and scope through multiple tools like vulnerability assessment and a greenhouse gas baseline emissions inventory and others, using that data to sort of characterize the scale and scope of the problem and identify the low-hanging fruit or the highest value fruit and what kind of ladders we have available to get at that fruit. And then that committee will be responsible to draft and or facilitate the drafting of a climate action plan that is specific to our town and our town's identified vulnerabilities and challenges. It's still very early days and lots of unknowns. And, I've already sort of seen some questions about, well, where are we going to get the money? And that's why the task force is in part formed. And that's why we're kind of going through the studies so that we can answer those questions confidently and make the best choices. So everybody in this room is either on the committee right now, but we will have the application up still, and we're always looking for more involvement. So if you know people, you want to bring people along, they can contact Scott. That's all I have to say about the resolution. And if you have any questions, I'd happily try to answer them. Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's
awesome. So, do you want to? Oh, okay.
Nope.
So the last thing really is to talk a little bit about the priority actions that have been brought forward for consideration. Tonight it was the kind of kickoff piece for the community engagement, but we have a survey that we can, I think Scott has numerous ways he's going to send it out and share it with the community. Please send it to all community members that you know, friends, whomever, so they can also sort of vote on the priority action areas for consideration. So this is meant to kind of help the town just get some input around what they should be applying for, not just in this round that's open September, but then in the 2 rounds next year as well. Scott, do you want to talk to the?
Yeah, I'd love to. So we've got a pretty robust list here, and then again, this is from pretty detailed conversations at the committee level, and again, this is just sort of a starting point, not necessarily the end point, right? So we'd love to hear your feedback. I did share the survey for those folks participating through GoToMeeting. We'll make sure to have that available through the website and through social media. Danielle talked to the first 2 pieces, and I think they're critical to pulling together the data sets that we need to make informed decisions. So, one, and I should back up a second. These action items are things that we might consider for funding, right? So, it costs money, it is a lot of time, and there's a lot of data to sift through. So it would be an investment. So the first 2, again, conducting a greenhouse gas baseline study. There was one that was completed, I think, in 2007, 2008, yeah. So we're behind, and we probably should get an update on that. I think things have changed a little bit. So that is one area of consideration, and sort of paired with that is the vulnerability assessment. And again, those 2 pieces are really critical for completing a full climate action plan. One thing that the committee has considered throughout this process is identifying possible need for some additional expertise on the staff level. And so, something that we've talked about internally is possibly having a shared sustainability coordinator with the town of Freeport, who is on similar trajectory as Yarmouth, to help sort of lift the conversation and to provide some additional sort of professional background to help move these things along. Because as you can tell, the committee is very capable and has a lot of phenomenal ideas. So that is something that we are considering. To Peter's earlier comments, the idea of building out electric vehicle infrastructure is going to be a continued need. So we've seen examples of other communities who are paying for networked or unnetworked electric vehicle stations, increasing the amount of electric vehicles in their municipal fleets and school fleets. So that's something we're going to continue to look at as a policy, but maybe an opportunity for some investment. Bicycle and pedestrian connectivity and infrastructure is something that is sort of a hallmark of Yarmouth, and something that we constantly have an eye on. So there could possibly be opportunities for investment in that arena. Something that is, again, very Yarmouth focused is the idea of preserving public open space and public green space. And again, that is in part an opportunity to advocate for and invest in additional land conservation for carbon sinks. But it also is, again, it's part of our sense of place and character of the community. So that is something else that we could take a look at. As we've talked a lot about coastal resiliency and biodiversity and how our future looks, and making sure that we're able to sort of sustain our legacy industries that are around here and make sure that we can preserve the coastline that everybody loves and appreciates. We've also had conversations about working with the business community to develop incentives to help create sort of a public-private partnership when it comes to doing our part and moving towards some of those climate action goals. And finally, Peter had mentioned as well, there's, I think, a lot of opportunity for just continued community conversation, whether it's through these types of forums or if there's something that's maybe a little bit more interactive and fun. There are opportunities to invest in greater community outreach. So those are the action items that we have on the table. Those are included in that survey that Sarah referenced, and we'll make sure that folks will have ample time to react to that and sort of respond.
So the hope tonight for anybody that's here in person is you can vote at the table over there. We have some green dots. So I would ask that you try and keep it to your top three, just because that's the most useful way for us to know sort of I know it's hard. These are all very important things. I would say that I see the GHG baseline and the vulnerability assessment as sort of one, so you could think of those as grouped together because it's really part of the climate action planning process. So,
I think one thing I'll just add to this is, in participating in this sort of cohort of like-minded and neighboring communities, there's a lot of opportunity for shared experience and sharing of information and sharing of expertise. And so as we continue to look through the summer and prepare for that September deadline, there may be other things that pop up that may make sense on a regional level. So I think that's certainly something to consider. And to Peter's earlier point, those economies of scale are real. And again, sharing of ideas and supporting on a regional basis, I think, is going to be critical for sort of making the inroads that the state's really looking for.
Yeah. And so once we get, the town gets some input, over the next few weeks from the community, then sort of the hard work of crafting an application for funding, in which you really need to have a very sort of specific project with deliverables and a budget and that kind of thing, is what we'll focus on for the rest of the summer to try and get that in by mid-September.
Does anybody have any questions before we go ahead and sort of go on to our ranking and Q&A?
Yeah.
Are there any pieces of information that would help Yarmouth increase its competitiveness for other sources of funding as well, too?
Yeah.
State environmental or economic development programs, or federal or DOT or
That's a really good question. So I think any amount of planning helps increase your competitiveness for those, because then you can understand, what projects might be in the pipeline. The thing that GPCOG sees most often is that, we'll be like, there was a great funding opportunity from the federal government, and people are like, I don't have any projects in the pipeline. So like trying to do that work of creating really a project pipeline. So your climate action plan will do that, comprehensive planning, open space plans, that kind of work where you really have gotten the input of the community, have thought through some of the challenges, understanding opportunities. I think that is most essential and will position you. Some of the FEMA funding that's out there right now is a really good example. There's significant dollars for hazard mitigation funding available, both at the state level through FEMA funds that come to the state, but then also competing at the national level. Saco just got a grant to build resilience into a wastewater treatment site that's right on the coast in Saco. It's a huge project. We're talking tens of millions of dollars these projects are, and it's getting funded through FEMA. So, the state would love to see more towns apply for stuff like that, but that really does take significant planning. So that is my pitch, really, is to do the planning and get as much, of the community involved as possible.
And just a slight tangent from that too, the timing is pretty convenient because we've got, we kicked off last night a community visioning process. That's sort of the vision and value statement in preparation for a comprehensive plan update. And so there's a lot of overlap there. And again, some of the things that we had outlined as priority actions, again, the open space, the bicycle and pedestrian connectivity, some of those sense of place pieces, I think fit really nicely. And again, of course, the coastal living and access to the water, there's a lot of overlap there. So it's a good conversation to have. And I think there's layers here that we should be considering as we move forward.
Yeah, Danielle.
If a person was interested in building a list of funding opportunities to put on the wall and sit back and stare at, where would that person
The Greater Portland Council.
Yeah.
start going about building that?
Yeah. It's hard. Yeah. You can certainly call me. Please feel free. We do not, so we often, publicize to our lists of contacts, federal and state funding opportunities. We do not currently have a running list of available ones. It's a huge effort to even understand what's out there. We did a workshop recently with the Maine Emergency Management Agency to understand some of the FEMA grants. So that's a good example of ways in which we say, we see that there's really a lack of applications where we know there's a need for hazard mitigation. So we try and intervene in ways in which we can at least bring resources. We do not currently have a constantly updated list because especially with the federal government right now, it is impossible to keep up across all of the agencies that are giving money.
I was gonna say, we have been in, at least I've been in a workshop where that has been recognized as a problem.
Yeah.
That a lot of towns, regional providers just don't know where to go to get the money. And so I think that's something that we also recognize is a problem.
Yeah, and it's something we can think about how to, we do various things. We have, so for Maine Clean Communities, which is focused on transportation, we share, the EPA has a huge school bus funding program right now. So we've done a webinar on that. We try and bring, especially for those big pots, we try and bring resources to people to understand what they are at least.
Even at an incomplete.
Yeah. Yeah, and we could do something. We could certainly put something on our website where we can say, these are places that you should start looking. They might not be up to date or they might not be open right now, but we know that that every year, for example, there is Diesel Emission Reduction Act grants that come out, right? Yeah, so yeah, give me a call. But we can certainly put something together on our website, but it is a tough challenge. At the state level too, the state, we could, there are frequent grants that are smaller, but that come out through the state, shore and harbor planning grants, the coastal community grants that they have through the Department of Agriculture, whatever the CNF are for, forestry, conservation and forestry. There we go. So yeah, we can definitely put some that we know are reoccurring places to look for money.
This is an
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I was. Yeah.
I guess I was kind of thinking of solving backwards a little bit too,
Mhm.
because there might be things that we could get funding for that would be harder to reach as a goal if we didn't, but if we did, we might be like, oh, actually, I'm not good one. But so a little bit of both directions, you know.
Yeah, and like understanding sort of how to match, like the municipal EV infrastructure, there's a huge amount of money coming to the state that they're going to be investing in charging stations. So I've been steering most communities away from using this particular community resilience partnership for that, because that's going to happen anyways. No need to use your dollars on that, you know.
The electric school buses, to name one example of this, pulling funds from the DER grant,
Mhm.
the diesel emission reduction, the state DOE,
Mhm.
and which was very large. And then another EPA, I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, there were four different grants. And we hadn't had to quit. We might have done, what might have done that, but as it was, I don't actually know the numbers, but I know you would go out and buy a 50-seat electric school bus, it could cost you about $400,000.
Yeah, they're like $375,000.
So that's 800,000. So we get 75% of that cost. So two electric school buses for less than the cost of one diesel.
Yeah, how much does one diesel cost?
They're like 110. Oh no, are they? I thought they were like maybe 150. One.
Depends on the gender and the size.
Yeah.
The class of the bus.
Yeah.
One with a 50-seater.
The biggest one, yeah. It's at least twice as much. Yeah. Yeah. So the EPA's Clean School Bus Program is open right now and is funding up to like 25 school buses. So there's a huge amount of money. There are priority communities in Maine that they're looking at. So those are generally rural or low-income communities. But there's still money out there. So.
We've got our eye on it. Too,
Yeah.
as well. Great.
Other questions?
I see Celine is still hanging in with us on GoToMeeting. Any questions or comments, Celine?
No, thank you. Great job, everyone. I'm filling out the survey.
Excellent. See, perfect. Awesome. And so if there's no other questions, we can sort of wrap up the Q&A piece, and you guys can go and sort of interact with the board a little bit. But I did want to just take an opportunity before we close out to thank Sarah and Kelly for their continued really phenomenal work and super helpful in helping pull this together and being a regional sort of conduit for all the other communities and what they're doing as well. And huge thanks to the SEAS committee for continued hard work. I mean, just really phenomenal and bright people. So we're lucky to have them. And with that, we'll close up.
Thank you all.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank you
you.
guys.